In a serene park in Akron, Ohio, two racist cops humiliated a black man with an unjust arrest. But they never dreamed he'd face them again, this time as the judge, holding their fate, in a courtroom showdown that changed everything. The late afternoon sun bathed Elmwood Park in Akron, Ohio, in a warm golden glow, where the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the joyful laughter of children playing near the playground. Families sprawled across picnic blankets, their chatter blending with the chirping of birds, while a group of teenagers tossed a frisbee near the edge of a shimmering pond, their shouts echoing through the air. Amid this lively scene, Marcus Ellison, a 40-year-old judge, sat on a wooden bench under the shade of a towering maple tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Dressed in a simple navy polo shirt and khakis, he held a worn copy of a legal journal, his brow furrowed in concentration as he reviewed a recent case study on sentencing reform. Marcus had carved out a rare moment of solitude from his demanding schedule at the courthouse, hoping to recharge before returning to his chambers the next day. His salt and pepper hair caught the sunlight as he adjusted his glasses, completely absorbed in his reading, oblivious to the storm brewing just beyond his quiet corner of the park. A sudden screech of tires shattered the park's tranquility, the sound slicing through the cheerful hum like a jagged blade. A police cruiser pulled up sharply to the curb, its lights flashing briefly before going dark, drawing uneasy glances from nearby picnickers. Two officers stepped out, their postures rigid with an air of authority that felt out of place in the relaxed setting. Officer James Bennett, a stocky man in his late 30s, with a buzz cut and a hard-set jaw, adjusted his belt as his eyes scanned the park with a predatory intensity. His partner, Officer Ryan Holt, a wiry man with a permanent scowl etched into his face, followed closely behind, his palm resting on his holster in a deliberate show of power that sent a ripple of tension through the onlookers. Their gazes zeroed in on Marcus, the only person sitting alone in the vicinity. And Bennett's lips curled into a sneer as he muttered something under his breath to Holt, who nodded in agreement, his scowl deepening. The air grew heavy with tension, the park's cheerful atmosphere dimming as the officers strode toward Marcus, their boots crunching against the gravel path with a menacing rhythm. "Sir, we need to speak with you," Bennett called out, his tone sharp and laced with suspicion, cutting through the park's warmth like a cold wind. Marcus looked up, startled, his journal slipping slightly in his fingers as he registered the officer's approach. A few onlookers, a young mother pushing a stroller, her eyes wide with concern, and an elderly man walking his dog, his steps slowing as he sensed the shift in the air, paused to watch, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. A father nearby, who'd been tossing a football with his son, lowered his voice and whispered, "What's going on?" His tone tinged with worry as he pulled his child closer. "Of course," Marcus replied, his voice calm but cautious as he closed the journal and set it on the bench beside him, his movements deliberate as he tried to gauge the situation. Holt stepped closer, his scowl deepening as he barked, "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. What are you doing here?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unwavering despite the accusatory tone that grated against his nerves. "I'm reading," he said simply, gesturing to the legal journal, its cover worn from years of use. "It's a public park. Is there a problem?" The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening, and Bennett snapped, "We'll need to see some ID, now." Marcus's pulse quickened, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest, as he recognized the all-too-familiar edge in their voices, a tone he'd heard countless times in his courtroom, the kind that often preceded unfair treatment for people who looked like him. He'd presided over cases where defendants shared stories of being targeted for no reason other than the color of their skin, their voices trembling with the weight of injustice. Now, that same prejudice was staring him in the face, its presence as undeniable as the tension crackling in the air. Still, he kept his composure, reaching into his pocket for his wallet with a steady hand. "I'd like to know the reason for this," he said, his tone firm but measured as he handed over his driver's license, his eyes locking onto Bennett's with a quiet challenge. Bennett snatched the ID, scanning the information with a mocking smirk that made Marcus's stomach churn. "Marcus Ellison," he read aloud, his tone dripping with disdain, each syllable a deliberate jab. "You live around here, Ellison? Or are you just passing through?" Marcus inhaled deeply, forcing himself to remain calm despite the growing knot of frustration tightening in his stomach. "I live in this city," he replied, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I came to the park to read, that's not a crime." But the officers weren't listening. Their scrutiny had already morphed into something darker, something Marcus knew he couldn't reason with, a prejudice that threatened to unravel the peace he'd sought in the park that day. Bennett tossed Marcus's ID back with a dismissive flick of his wrist, the card landing on the bench with a soft thud, but instead of walking away, the officers closed in, their presence looming over him like a storm cloud ready to burst. Holt's palm remained on his holster, a silent threat that sent a chill down Marcus's spine, the metal glinting ominously in the fading sunlight. "You always carry around fancy books like that?" Holt sneered, his words thick with mockery as he gestured to the legal journal, his tone a thinly veiled attack on Marcus's presence in the park. "What's a guy like you doing in a place like this all alone?" Bennett added, his voice heavy with an accusation Marcus couldn't quite grasp, but one he recognized as rooted in stereotype rather than fact. By now, a small crowd had gathered, their murmurs growing louder as they watched the scene unfold, a mix of concern and discomfort etched on their faces. Among them, a teenage girl named Aliyah, who'd been playing frisbee with her friends, pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she began to record. She'd seen videos like this online, scenes of injustice that made her stomach churn, leaving her feeling both powerless and enraged. And she wasn't about to let this moment slip by, undocumented, her resolve a small but growing fire in her chest. Marcus's frustration deepened, his fingers clenching into fists in his lap as he fought to keep his tone steady, the weight of their words pressing down on him like a physical force. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of," he said firmly, his years on the bench lending him a quiet authority that made Bennett's jaw tighten, a flash of anger crossing the officer's face. The officer's cheeks flushed red, his shout echoing across the park. "Don't get smart with us," he barked, his hand shooting out to grab Marcus's arm with a roughness that made the crowd gasp. "You're resisting?" Marcus's eyes widened in shock. He hadn't even moved, hadn't given them any reason to escalate, yet the accusation felt like a slap across the face. "What are you doing?" he exclaimed, his voice rising with a mix of disbelief and indignation as Bennett yanked him to his feet, the sudden movement jarring his body. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around his wrists, the metal digging into his skin with a sharp sting, as Holt shouted, "Stop resisting!" A performance clearly meant for the growing crowd, their murmurs turning into a low hum of outrage. The father who'd been tossing a football earlier stepped forward, his tone sharp as he called out, "He didn't do anything, leave him alone!" But Holt spun around, pointing a finger at the man. "Stay out of this or you're next," he snapped, silencing the father but fueling the crowd's unease, a small sign of defiance amid the escalating tension. Aliyah's fingers shook as she filmed, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger, the phone screen blurring slightly as her grip faltered. She whispered to her friend Jamal, a lanky 16-year-old with a skateboard tucked under his arm, his eyes wide with disbelief. "This isn't right. He wasn't doing anything," she said, her words barely above a whisper, but her conviction carried the weight of her anger. Jamal nodded, his own memories of being stopped by police for no reason flashing through his mind like a painful reel. He'd been riding his bike home from school last year when an officer pulled him over, claiming he looked suspicious, the humiliation of that moment searing itself into his memory. Seeing Marcus, a man who reminded him of his own father, a man who carried himself with quiet dignity, being treated this way ignited a spark of defiance within him, a fire that refused to be extinguished. "We've got to do something," Jamal muttered, his tone low but firm, a flicker of hope in the darkness of the moment, his resolve strengthened by the father's brief stand against the officers. Marcus caught Aliyah's eye as he was led to the cruiser, a silent plea for her to keep recording, a flicker of gratitude in his gaze that gave her the courage to hold her phone steady despite the fear, clawing at her chest. The ride to the station was suffocating, the silence broken only by the crackle of the police radio, each burst of static a reminder of the reality Marcus now faced. He sat in the back seat, his wrists aching from the cuffs, the metal pressing into his skin with every bump in the road. His mind raced as he replayed the events at the park, the officer's words echoing in his head like a bitter refrain. He thought of the countless cases he'd presided over, the stories of injustice he'd heard from defendants who'd been targeted for their race, their voices trembling as they recounted their experiences. Now, he was living their reality, a respected judge reduced to a suspect in the span of minutes, his identity stripped away by the color of his skin. The irony burned in his chest, mingling with a simmering anger that he forced himself to contain, his legal mind already mapping out the steps he'd take to fight back. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. He had the knowledge, the resources, and the resolve to turn this injustice into a battle for change. But as the cruiser pulled into the station, Marcus couldn't shake the weight of humiliation pressing down on him, a weight he vowed to transform into a weapon for justice, a promise that burned brighter with every passing second. At the station, the booking process unfolded like a calculated ritual of degradation, each step a deliberate assault on Marcus's dignity. His fingers were pressed against the ink pad, leaving smudged prints on the booking sheet, the gritty texture of the ink lingering on his skin as a reminder of his loss of control. The camera's flash seared his vision as his photograph was taken, his face set in a mask of controlled fury, the click of the shutter a mocking echo in the sterile room. He was led to a small holding cell, the fluorescent lights buzzing relentlessly overhead, casting stark shadows on the concrete walls that seemed to close in with every passing second. "Enjoy your stay," Bennett sneered, his voice thick with malice as he slammed the cell door shut, the metallic clang reverberating in the confined space like a gunshot. Marcus sat on the narrow bench, his palms pressed tightly together in his lap, the ache in his wrists from the handcuffs a constant throb, a physical manifestation of the injustice he'd endured. His mind churned with strategies to dismantle the flimsy charges of resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer. He knew the law inside and out. These accusations wouldn't hold up under scrutiny, but he also understood the uphill battle ahead, tangled in systemic biases he'd spent his career trying to unravel, the weight of that reality pressing down on him like an iron grip, threatening to crush his spirit. Hours stretched on in suffocating silence, the relentless buzz of the light scraping against his nerves, each second a test of his endurance. Finally, a young officer approached the cell, his movements hesitant as he clutched a clipboard, his eyes darting away from Marcus's steady gaze. "Ellison, you've been released on bail," he muttered, the key rattling in the lock with a sharp jingle as he opened the door, the sound a small reprieve in the oppressive atmosphere. Marcus stepped out, his legs stiff from hours of sitting, the stiffness a lingering reminder of his confinement, and made his way to the station's entrance, where his longtime friend and fellow judge Lena Carter waited by the curb. Lena, a 45-year-old woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, rushed over, her expression a storm of relief and fury, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched her resolve. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asked, her tone trembling with a mix of concern and anger as she pulled him into a brief, firm hug, her grip a vital anchor that eased the knot of tension in his chest. "I'm fine," he replied, though the word felt hollow, his body still taut with the strain of his ordeal, his voice carrying the weight of suppressed rage. As they drove away, Lena kept stealing glances at him, her fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened, the leather creaking under her grasp. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice sharp with indignation, slicing through the hum of the car's engine like a blade. "You're a judge, for God's sake. How dare they treat you like this?" Marcus exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the passing streetlights, their soft glow a stark contrast to the harsh fluorescence of the cell, a fleeting warmth in the cold aftermath of his arrest. "It's not about me being a judge," he said quietly, his words heavy with a truth he'd known for years, a truth that burned in his chest. It's about me being a black man in their eye. That's all they saw. Lena's expression softened. Her own experiences with prejudice as a black woman in the legal system flashing through her mind. Colleagues questioning her credentials, defendants doubting her authority. The subtle but constant erosion of her legitimacy. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and determination, her eyes searching his face for a spark of hope. Marcus's jaw tightened, a flicker of resolve igniting within him, transforming the weight of his humiliation into a quiet fire that burned brighter with each passing moment. "I'm going to fight," he said, his voice steady with a newfound power, each word a vow etched in stone. "Not just for me. For everyone who's been through this." He thought of Ilia's video, the grainy footage that had gone viral, the outpouring of support from the community. Emails, calls, letters from strangers who shared their own stories of injustice, a chorus of voices that reminded him he wasn't alone, a spark of hope that fueled his determination. That moment of resolve, bolstered by Lena's unwavering support and the community's solidarity, marked a turning point, a beacon of light that pierced through the darkness of the day, setting the stage for the battle ahead. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Each day a step closer to justice, each moment a testament to Marcus's unwavering commitment. He worked tirelessly at home, his dining table buried under legal pads and case files, the papers spilling over the edges as he meticulously built a civil rights lawsuit against Bennett, Holt, and the department, his pen scratching furiously against the paper as he channeled his anger into action. The momentum was building, a wave of change he could feel in his bones, a groundswell of support that gave him strength. Then one evening, as he sat at his desk reviewing a draft of his lawsuit, Lena called with unexpected news that stopped him cold, her voice crackling through the phone with a cautious irony. "Marcus," she said, her tone measured but tinged with a wry edge, "you've been assigned to preside over a misconduct hearing next month. The defendants? Bennett and Holt." Marcus froze, the weight of the revelation hitting him like a tidal wave, his heart pounding as the irony of the situation sank in, his grip tightening on the phone. The officers who'd humiliated him would now face him in his courtroom, a twist of fate that turned his anger into a fierce anticipation, a moment of poetic justice that set the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. The courtroom in Akron's municipal courthouse buzzed with quiet anticipation as people filed in, finding their seats for what seemed like a routine misconduct hearing, their whispers a low hum that filled the air with expectation. Bennett and Holt sat at the defendant's table, their uniforms crisp and their expressions smug, as if they believed this hearing was just another formality they could breeze through, their arrogance a shield against the storm they didn't see coming. Said they'd been accused of excessive force in an unrelated incident, beating a young man named Kevin during a traffic stop, and their confidence was palpable as they leaned over to whisper to their lawyer, a middle-aged man with a nervous tic, his pen tapping anxiously against his notepad in a staccato rhythm. The room was packed with onlookers, including Aaliyah and Jamal, who'd come to support Marcus after their video gained traction, their presence a quiet reminder of the community's stake in this moment. The air crackled with anticipation, an electric charge that seemed to hum beneath the surface as the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," his words a clarion call that signaled the moment of reckoning had arrived. Marcus stepped out of his chambers, his black robe flowing behind him as he ascended to the bench with a commanding presence, each step a declaration of his authority, his posture unyielding. His expression was calm but resolute, his glasses catching the light as he surveyed the room, his gaze steady and piercing, a silent promise of impartiality, despite the personal stakes. When his eyes landed on Bennett and Holt, the officer's smugness evaporated in an instant, replaced by a visceral shock that rippled through their bodies like a seismic wave. Bennett's face drained of color, his mouth falling open in disbelief, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple as the reality of the situation crashed over him. Holt's jaw tightened, his fists clenching on the table, the knuckles whitening as panic flashed in his eyes. a stark contrast to the arrogance he'd worn like armor just moments before. They recognized him immediately. The man they'd humiliated in the park, now sitting in judgment over them, his presence a towering reminder of their grave misjudgment. Marcus allowed the moment to stretch, the weight of their realization settling over the courtroom like a storm cloud, the silence heavy with the gravity of the situation. Before he spoke, in a clear, steady voice that cut through the unease like a blade, "This court is now in session, please be seated." The officers sat stiffly, their earlier confidence replaced by a palpable fear as Marcus began the proceedings, his every word measured and deliberate, a testament to his commitment to fairness despite the personal injustice he'd suffered at their hands. He maintained his impartiality, his tone even as he addressed the attorneys, ensuring that the trial remained a beacon of justice, not vengeance, his professionalism a shield against the emotions that simmered beneath the surface. During the prosecutor's opening statement, detailing the officer's use of excessive force against Kevin, Bennett kept stealing glances at Marcus, his fingers fidgeting nervously with the edge of his sleeve, the fabric fraying under his anxious grip, unable to meet the judge's steady gaze. Holt whispered to their lawyer, his voice barely audible but laced with panic. "How is he the judge?" The lawyer shook his head, his own nerves evident as he tried to focus on the case, his pen now scratching furiously against his notepad. But the officer's fear was undeniable, a raw, exposed wound that bled into their every movement. From Kevin's perspective, seated in the gallery with a bruised cheek still visible from the incident, Marcus's presence on the bench was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope that justice might finally be served, his trembling hands steadying as he watched the man who'd endured a similar injustice now hold the power to right this wrong, his faith in the system slowly rekindling with each measured word Marcus spoke. A woman in the gallery, an older community member who'd seen the viral video, whispered to her neighbor, "Those officers thought they could get away with it again, but not this time." Her voice low but firm, a ripple of defiance that spread through the crowd, amplifying the stakes of the moment. As the hearing progressed, Marcus's impartiality remained unwavering, his rulings sharp and precise, a bulwark against any accusation of bias. The irony of the situation, a quiet undercurrent of satisfaction that rippled through the gallery. During a recess, Bennett and Holt stepped into the hallway, their voices low but agitated, their fear now a tangible force that clung to them like a second skin. "This can't be happening," Bennett hissed, his palms trembling as he wiped sweat from his brow, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too constricting, a physical manifestation of the pressure bearing down on him. "We arrested him. He can't be the judge." Holt shook his head, his scowl deepening, his voice a low growl that barely masked his terror. "It's a setup. It has to be." But their lawyer interjected, his tone sharp and exasperated. "It's not a setup, it's a coincidence. And your actions are what got you here, not him." The officers weren't listening, too consumed by the surreal turn of events, their fear a stark contrast to the arrogance they'd shown in the park. Their bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's authority, their once unshakable confidence reduced to ash. Back in the courtroom, Marcus caught Elia's eye from the gallery, her small nod of encouragement a reminder of the community standing behind him, a silent promise that justice would be served, a spark of pride igniting within him as he prepared to deliver the ruling that would change everything, a moment of triumph that felt within reach after weeks of struggle. The hearing stretched into the second day, the evidence against Bennett and Holt piling up like bricks in a wall of undeniable truth, each piece heavier than the last. Kevin, the young man they'd beaten during a traffic stop, took the stand, his voice trembling as he recounted the night that had shattered his sense of safety. His fingers clutched the edge of the witness box for support, the wood smooth and cold beneath his grip. "I wasn't resisting," he said, his eyes darting nervously between the prosecutor and the officers, their presence a looming reminder of his fear. "I just asked why they pulled me over, and they tackled me. I thought I was going to die." The prosecutor pressed further, presenting video evidence from a nearby security camera, the grainy footage showing the officers' unprovoked aggression, their batons swinging with a ferocity that made the gallery gasp, a collective intake of breath that rippled through the room. Bennett and Holt's attempts to justify their actions fell apart like a house of cards. their testimony riddled with contradictions, Holt claiming Kevin had lunged at them, while Bennett stammered through a conflicting story of non-compliance, each word digging their grave deeper, their credibility unraveling before the court. Marcus listened intently, his expression a mask of neutrality, but inside a storm of frustration and determination raged, this case a microcosm of the systemic failures he'd witnessed for years, a battle that extended far beyond Kevin, to every person wronged by those meant to protect them. When the time came to deliver his ruling, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence, every eye fixed on Marcus as he adjusted his glasses, the faint creak of the frames a quiet prelude to the justice about to be served. The role of law enforcement is to uphold justice, with integrity and fairness, he began, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of his years on the bench, each word a hammer striking the anvil of accountability. When that trust is broken, the harm extends far beyond the immediate victim. It erodes the foundation of our community. He paused, his gaze flickering toward Bennett and Holt, who sat with their heads bowed, the weight of his words pressing down on them like a physical force, their shoulders slumping under the burden of their guilt. The evidence has shown that officers Bennett and Holt acted with excessive force, disregarding their duty. Their actions reflect a pattern of abuse that cannot be ignored. Marcus outlined the consequences with precision: indefinite suspension without pay, mandatory retraining, and a permanent mark on their records, each penalty a step toward accountability. He also recommended a department-wide review of use-of-force policies, his voice steady with conviction as he called for systemic change, a ripple that could reshape the future of policing in Akron. From Lena's perspective in the gallery, Marcus's ruling was a testament to his strength, a moment of vindication for the humiliation he'd endured, her chest swelling with pride as she watched her friend turn pain into progress, her faith in the system bolstered by his unwavering commitment to justice. As Marcus struck his gavel to close the case, the sharp crack echoing through the room, the gallery erupted in quiet murmurs of approval, a wave of relief washing over the onlookers. Aaliyah and Jamal exchanged a relieved smile, their hands clasped tightly, the warmth of their grip a silent celebration of their video's impact, a small but mighty spark that had ignited this moment of justice. Bennett hesitated as he stood, his movements slow and deliberate, his uniform now a symbol of shame rather than authority. "Your Honor, I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible, shaky with a mix of shame and regret, his eyes unable to meet Marcus's steady gaze. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the apology without offering absolution, his expression unyielding. He knew true change would come through actions, not words, a lesson he hoped Bennett would take to heart. Holt remained silent, his head still bowed as he followed Bennett out of the courtroom, their steps heavy with the consequences of their actions, the echo of their boots a fading reminder of their fall from grace. Marcus turned to Lena, who'd been watching from the gallery, and she offered a firm handshake, her eyes shining with pride, the pressure of her grip a symbol of their shared fight for justice. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, a quiet victory that resonated deep within Marcus, transforming his resolve into a profound sense of accomplishment. From Kevin's perspective, Marcus's ruling was a lifeline, a validation of the pain he'd endured, and a promise that his voice mattered, a weight lifted from his shoulders as he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He approached Marcus after the hearing, his palms trembling as he extended a hand, the gesture tentative but sincere. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, tears brimming in his eyes as he spoke. "I didn't think anyone would believe me." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, the warmth of his touch a grounding force, his voice soft but firm as he replied, "You were heard today, Kevin. That's what justice looks like." The exchange was a quiet victory, a moment of healing that Marcus savored as he left the courtroom, his head held high, the weight of the past weeks lifting with every step, replaced by a burgeoning hope for a brighter future. The community's support, the officers' accountability, and the promise of reform were all steps toward a world where justice wasn't a privilege, but a right. a future Marcus had helped build, a legacy that filled him with a quiet pride as he walked into the light of a new day. 6 months later, Elmwood Park had transformed into a symbol of change in Akron. Its once quiet benches now a gathering place for community forums on justice and equality, the air filled with the hum of voices united in purpose. A plaque had been installed near the spot where Marcus was arrested, its bronze surface gleaming in the sunlight. The inscription, "Justice for All," etched in bold letters, a permanent tribute to his fight against injustice and the ripple effect it had created. The city had implemented new policies, mandatory bias training for officers, a civilian review board for complaints, and public town halls to foster dialogue between law enforcement and residents, each measure a testament to the movement Marcus had sparked. His ruling had reverberated far beyond Akron, with other cities looking to his case as a model for reform, a blueprint for change that promised a more equitable future. Marcus stood by the plaque, his gaze softening as he traced the inscription with his fingertip, the cool metal a tactile reminder of the battle he'd fought, a battle that had changed the city for the better, a legacy that filled him with a quiet reverence for the power of justice. Marcus, now a vocal advocate for police reform, worked closely with Aaliyah, who'd started a youth advocacy group inspired by her role in sharing the video, her once timid demeanor replaced by a quiet confidence that shone through in her every action. Her hands were steady as she handed out flyers at community events, the paper crisp and bright with bold calls for accountability, her voice strong as she spoke to crowds about the importance of standing up for what's right. A transformation that Marcus watched with pride. Jamal had become her co-organizer, his own experiences with prejudice fueling his passion, a fire that had turned his anger into action. His skateboard now a symbol of the freedom he fought for as he mentored younger teens, teaching them how to document injustices safely, his lessons a shield against the fear he'd once felt. At a regional justice conference, Marcus stood on stage, his robe replaced by a sharp suit, his presence commanding as he addressed the crowd, the microphone amplifying his resolute tone. "Justice isn't a gift, it's a right," he declared, each word carrying the weight of his journey, a call to action that resonated through the room, igniting a spark in every listener. Aaliyah watched from the audience, her heart swelling with pride, her hands clasped tightly as she listened to the man who'd inspired her to find her voice, a moment of gratitude that deepened her commitment to the cause. From the perspective of the young activists in the audience, Marcus was a hero, a beacon of hope that justice could prevail against all odds, his story a touchstone for their own struggles. Their applause echoed through the hall, a wave of inspiration that touched each of them in its own way, a chorus of voices united in purpose. One young woman, a college student named Maya, felt a deep connection to Marcus's story, her own experiences with racial profiling flashing through her mind. She'd been stopped by police while walking home from class, accused of looking suspicious despite carrying nothing but her textbooks, the humiliation a scar that had never fully healed. Marcus's words gave her strength, a reminder that her voice mattered, her pen pausing over her notebook as she whispered to a friend, "He's why I'll keep fighting," her voice trembling with emotion, her resolve mirroring Marcus's own, a fire that would shape the future of her community in ways he couldn't yet foresee, a legacy that would live on through every life he touched. Her story was one of many, a tapestry of resilience woven through the crowd, each thread a testament to the power of Marcus' journey, a movement that had grown from a single act of injustice into a force for change. Marcus's journey reached beyond the conference hall, touching the hearts of those who heard it, a story of justice that could heal the deepest divides, a narrative that resonated with anyone who'd ever felt the sting of prejudice. Dear viewer, his fight reminds us of the power we hold to stand up against injustice, to turn pain into progress, a call to action that echoes in every heart. Have you ever faced prejudice and turned it into a moment of change? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear your victories, just like Marcus's. Stories that remind us of the resilience we all carry within us, a shared strength that binds us together. If this story touched you, like this video, subscribe and hit the bell for more tales of justice and hope. narratives that inspire us to build a world where fairness isn't a dream, but a reality we create together. Change begins with you, with every voice we lift, with every step we take toward a better tomorrow. A tomorrow where justice reigns, a future we can all believe in. A world transformed by the courage of those who dare to stand up and fight.